September 23, 1940. Butler, Pennsylvania. A bone-cold fog hovers over the valley as midnight approaches. In the dim light of a battered warehouse, acetylene torches hiss and metal hammers ring, a frantic symphony of American desperation echoing into the night. With trembling hands, Ralph Turner wipes sweat from his brow, squinting at a machine that shouldn't exist. An absurdly small, boxy vehicle bears the scars of sleepless invention. Mismatched bolts, pieces of plumbing pipe, off-the-shelf wheels. Paint hasn't even dried. Nothing about it says military might. Everything about it screams improvised hope. But time is up. In a few hours, this machine, the first Bantam reconnaissance car, must roar to life and make the 300-mile run to the Army's proving grounds in Maryland. It's not just a test of steel and design, but of faith itself. 7 weeks ago, Bantam was nearly bankrupt, mocked by bigger rivals, and ignored by the government. What Ralph Turner and his team did not know, the hidden truth embedded in every hasty bolt and every anxious breath, was that this ungainly contraption would change world history. Within 5 years, its silhouette would race across deserts and beaches, from Normandy hedgerows to Pacific Island jungles. And when history's deadliest war was over, the Jeep would become an icon, built by the millions and beloved by the world. Tonight, in the dim haze of steel and sweat, history's gears are turning. Somewhere outside, a convoy of death marches on. But in here, surrounded by exhaustion and hope, America is about to rewrite the rules of war. And all because a tiny car company said yes when the world thought only giants could answer. What began as an impossible deadline in a time of global despair would become the miracle of American innovation, the story of the 49-day Jeep. What nobody believed, what nobody even dared imagine, was that 7 weeks would be enough to change everything. June 1940. Europe is dying. Paris has fallen. The world trembles before Nazi blitzkrieg. Axis forces slice through old defenses while millions flee burning cities. The United States watches, frustrated, unprepared, and afraid. The U.S. Army has a problem. Their forces are trapped in the past. Cavalry still rides horses. Officers argue over motorcycle messengers and ponder if a golf cart can haul a machine gun. The Army's scout vehicles are a hodgepodge of leftovers, Model T Fords with bolts shaking loose, motorcycles with sidecars, and beaten-up trucks that founder in mud. Meanwhile, modern warfare, streamlined, mechanized, unstoppable, crushes the old world under tank treads. American officers know, if the U.S. enters the war, their soldiers will need something new, something light, powerful, and nimble, a vehicle that can go anywhere, do anything, and survive hell. The specifications, finally formalized on July 11, 1940, read like a wish list from a dreamer. 4-wheel drive, a payload of 660 pounds, a top speed of 50 miles per hour, a folding windshield, 3-man crew, less than 1,300 pounds, enough torque to crawl up a muddy hill with the weight of a squad in gear. Most importantly, the Army demands a working prototype ready for testing in exactly 49 days. The brass mails out requests to 135 truck and automobile companies, giants like Ford, General Motors, Chrysler. Many don't even respond. Others laugh. Some call the Army's engineering office, certain it's a misprint. One Army staffer records a comment from an auto executive. Build a 4-wheel drive, all-terrain armored car in 7 weeks? That's not engineering, that's suicide. But the Army doesn't waver. They want a general-purpose personnel or cargo carrier especially adaptable for reconnaissance and command, to be delivered, no compromises, no extensions. The ghosts of defeated armies roam Europe. The world asks, who will answer? Far from Detroit's gleaming assembly lines, in the echoing workshops of Butler, Pennsylvania, the American Bantam Car Company is bleeding to death. Once hopeful, Bantam now teeters on bankruptcy. Barely a skeleton crew, shelves half bare, only a handful of engineers left. But desperation breeds a quiet kind of genius. Bantam's ace in the hole is Harry Payne, a mid-level manager with a battered briefcase and haunted eyes. Known to friends as Pain in the Ass, Harry's reputation comes not from charm, but from obsession. He finds challenge exhilarating and has spent years fighting for every contract the big companies scorn. Alongside Payne is Robert Brown, a Scottish-American draftsman with a limp and ceaseless drive. Brown sketches in the margins of every memo. He dreams of wheels and gear ratios. Like Payne, he smells an opportunity behind the Army's impossible deadline. But Bantam's fortunes sway on a third man, an outsider. Karl Probst, a resourceful freelance engineer from Detroit, has spent his life bouncing between failing auto startups. With his round spectacles and clipped tie, Probst looks more teacher than inventor. Friends joke he's never seen a healthy company from the inside, but that's why Bantam calls him. The war is a shadow, growing every day. Probst, like Payne, is tired of losing. When Bantam asks him to design the Army's impossible car, with no promise of payment unless they win, he accepts, knowing this may be his last chance. His commitment is unconditional. In 48 hours, he sketches the core of the future, a boxy four-wheel drive design with leaf springs for each wheel, a fold-down windshield, and low squat body that hugs the terrain. One drawing to answer the agony of a world at war. Probst works through nights, fueled by thick coffee and smudged blueprints. He steals leaf springs from farm equipment, sketches axles from delivery vans, adapts parts from Bantam's outdated roadsters, and cobbles all with the crude poetry of necessity. In the heart of July, lightning flickers over Butler. Probst, insomniac, hands trembling, draws one last line across a grease-stained sheet. He folds the page, looks at Payne and Brown, and whispers, "What if we put the transfer case right here? Let the front axle work in concert, not just in a straight line, but powering all wheels, all the time." Brown stares. It's obvious and radical. Suddenly, the idea is alive, a machine that scrambles through muck and rock, that reconnects American soldiers not just with the road, but with hope. By day 7, the skeleton is growing. Steel frame, modular design, nothing wasted. Every inch, every bolt is negotiated, rationed, adapted. The parts list reads like an inventory of a nation at the edge. Plumbing pieces, tractor wheels, axle components dropped by suppliers too busy for fool's errands. By day 21, half of Bantam's plant is working around the clock. Turner comes in at dawn, shakes hands, and gets back to welding. Every call from Detroit is a reminder. The rest of the country still thinks they can't win. Still, Probst's revelation seems too simple. The Army's requirements had broken the backs of engineers at GM and Ford. Yet here, in the hands of a bankrupt team, a new kind of machine is being willed to life. When Probst finally shows the Army inspectors his sketch, the response is skeptical. "Looks like a toy," one general scoffs. "You can't take that to war." Probst shrugs. He's betting everything, his career, his reputation, and perhaps in the long run, 1,000 American lives. August 1940. The Army's eyes, cold, clinical, inspect the sketches and blueprints spread across Bantam's battered drafting tables. These officers are veterans of too many disappointments, their faith battered by past failures and the unrelenting surge of global chaos. Colonel William Lee, Chief Armored Car Evaluator, scans the Bantam plans and shakes his head. "It looks like a toy," he mutters. "You'd bring this to a war zone?" The Detroit Giants, Ford, Willys Overland, and GM circle like wolves, their lobbyists whispering that a tiny bankrupt company can't be entrusted with America's future. At the War Department, bureaucratic knives are drawn. "It'll never work," sneers a procurement official. "Bantam's days are over. The Army needs winners, not dreamers." Bantam fights back, dogged and desperate. In Washington, Harry Payne pleads with officials, laying out data, engineering memos, every ounce of grim determination. Probst and Turner work 18-hour days, sending telegrams and phone calls. At night, the shop lights never go dark in Butler. Meanwhile, the deadline ticks closer. On September 20th, an Army inspector visits Bantam's plant, eyes wide at the skeletal vehicle, unfinished but alive. The inspector's report is blunt. Too light, too small, not enough torque. The next morning, technical committees meet in a smoke-choked office. "That's suicide engineering," declares one civilian expert. "You can't jam all that spec into that weight. This is amateur hour." But there's no time for more theory. September 21st, 1940. The Bantam reconnaissance car rolls out of the Butler factory under a rain-streaked dawn. It needs to make a 250-mile trek to Camp Holabird, Maryland, mostly by its own power. No brakes, no rescue trucks. It hasn't even been properly broken in. Chief designer Harold Christ volunteers to drive. Wrenches and spare belts, fuel cans, and jugs of coolant rattle at his feet. His hands are clammy on the wheel, haunted by the fact that the Army's representatives will be waiting, stopwatches in hand, skepticism in their eyes. On rural roads, the prototype rattles and heaves. Welds groan. But hour after hour, the makeshift vehicle refuses to yield. Near Harrisburg, a water pump almost bursts. Turner and Christ patch it with a stripped tire valve and part of a garden hose, ingenuity at the edge of disaster. By nightfall, the battered BRC limps into the Camp Holabird gates with minutes to spare. Army engineers swarm it, measuring, prodding, ticking boxes on forms. The day after, on September 23rd, a light drizzle falls as the Army's Proving Grounds team assembles. They're expecting failure. Instead, what they receive is legend. The BRC speeds across rutted fields, climbs muddy hills, and crosses trenches. It traverses deep puddles and shrugs off ditches like a goat. The official evaluation notes surprise, performance far better than anticipated. Four-wheel drive is exceptional, turns tightly, flexible and nimble. But grumbles persist. Too light, too small an engine will never last a campaign. Bantam can't build enough. And in the background, Detroit's giants smell blood. As word of the little car's surprising triumph spreads through the Army, pressure mounts to put the design into mass production. Yet, Bantam is still a company of barely 500 people, working out of a small factory in western Pennsylvania. Ford and Willys, anxious to get in on the action, begin lobbying for access to the plans under the guise of national need. The War Department, fearing Bantam's inability to meet wartime volumes, makes a fateful decision. It distributes the Bantam blueprints, Karl Probst's creation, to Ford and Willys Overland, inviting them to build their own versions for further trials. Some Bantam employees call it betrayal. The Army calls it practical necessity. In November, Ford delivers its pygmy prototype. Willys Overland arrives late, but with a more powerful engine, a 60-horsepower beast that outmuscles Bantam's modest four-cylinder Continental. Both new entries borrow liberally from Probst's now Army-owned patents. The competition will now be decided by performance, cost, and the brutal scale needed to win a world war. Still, at Camp Holabird and in field maneuvers, officers keep returning to one phrase: Bantam may have built it first, maybe even best. General George Marshall, surveying the results months later, will call the little vehicle the greatest weapons contribution to the Allied cause in World War II. In the months that follow, the Bantam factory hums. More prototypes, the BRC-60 and the lightly refined BRC-40, roll off the line, testing innovations: four-wheel steering, new fender shapes, better windshield designs. The Army orders 70 BRC-60s for evaluation at bases across the nation. They send them to Fort Benning, Fort Knox, Fort Bragg, even to the British in North Africa, as the world braces for the storms ahead. Inside Bantam, exhaustion fights with pride. Payne and Probst watch as their miracle becomes the blueprint for the world, but contract after contract passes to the giants. By spring 1941, Willys and Ford begin mass production on the Army's chosen design, the Willys MB and Ford GPW. Bantam is relegated to small orders, trailers, and eventually obscurity. Yet in every camp, in Louisiana swamps, Tunisian sand, or a hedgerow outside St. Lo, dog faces and lieutenants alike rely on the descendant of Butler's desperate gamble. Men scrawl Jeep on the hoods and fenders. Somewhere in the chaos, the name sticks. The Bantam miracle, born of crisis and courage, is now rolling across history. Out at Camp Holabird, the Army logs speak volumes. The Bantam BRC, through grueling 30-day field trials, covers nearly 5,800 kilometers over broken ground, more than a typical civilian car might see in years. Frame welds crack, but are repaired. Engines overheat, but keep running. Axles strain, but do not shatter. Every malfunction is against the clock. If any flaw disables the vehicle for more than 24 hours, the project is disqualified. The Bantam crew adapts, improvises, and, against all odds, passes every test. Performance, far better than anticipated, reads one official note. Field officers, skeptical at first, watch the Jeep climb muddy inclines, ford streams, and haul weapons with a speed and agility no horse or motorcycle can match. As the Army's faith in the concept grows, the floodgates open. Orders are placed, not just for more Bantams, but for similar vehicles from Willys and Ford, now building interchangeable versions based on Bantam's blueprints. The legend is spreading. British officers in the North African desert receive the first combat jeeps. Russians are sent shipments under Lend-Lease. For every billion-dollar tank, a dozen jeeps bring supplies, evacuate wounded, ferry officers, and cut new paths through the chaos. By the war's end, over 640,000 military Jeeps have rolled out from Willys and Ford factories, their silhouette instantly recognizable across every front. The Jeep becomes a symbol, liberator, workhorse, ambulance, and command post rolled into one. The statistics are staggering. 2,642 Bantam BRCs of all types produced, every single one delivered despite impossible odds. Over 360,000 Willys MB Jeeps and 280,000 Ford GPWs built by 1945. Accident rates for frontline motorized units decreased by nearly a quarter, as Jeeps replace unreliable motorcycles and fragile civilian cars. But for thousands of soldiers, American, British, Soviet, Free French, the numbers are more than statistics. Each Jeep means fewer men left behind, more missions completed, more lives delivered from disaster. The Jeep's story does not end with the Allied victory. After 1945, the prototype that began its life in a racing warehouse in Butler becomes the backbone of post-war reconstruction. Surplus Jeeps plow fields, rescue flood victims, and climb up mountain passes. Farmers, police, and explorers the world over discover that the miracle of 7 weeks is just as vital in peacetime as in war. The design has become invisible, its logic now the default for every modern 4x4. Today, civilian Jeeps, SUVs, and military vehicles worldwide trace their ancestry to that fevered, miraculous rush of welding and drafting in 1940. The Jeep name, protected by trademark, becomes a global automotive legend, even as the true story of Butler fades in the popular imagination. The revolution is complete when it becomes invisible, one historian writes. Now, every truck that climbs a muddy hill, every ambulance that saves a life off-road, does so with the DNA of Bantam's desperate miracle. Bantam, in a cruel twist, does not profit from its greatest achievement. After producing just over 2,600 Jeeps and a run of critically needed trailers, the company is quietly wound down, its patent crowns scattered between Ford, Willys, and the Army bureaucracy. Karl Probst returns to quiet engineering work, unheralded. Harry Payne, tireless lobbyist and champion, dies in relative obscurity. Only years later do historians and veterans write to give credit back to the overlooked heroes of Butler. But as one Army officer puts it, he never sought fame, only fewer funerals. Every soldier who ever rode in a Jeep owed a debt to the men who said yes when the world said no. Today, the Butler miracle is memorialized in museums, Jeep festivals, and in the millions of rugged vehicles tackling impossible roads worldwide. The lesson remains. Sometimes, history is changed not by fortune or by genius, but by a team who refuses to let the clock run out. In the northwest corner of Butler, Pennsylvania, for decades a cluster of old brick buildings greeted dawn with the hiss of steam and the clatter of innovation. This was the birthplace of the Jeep, a shrine to American ingenuity, even as the world rolled forward, often forgetting the humble hands that shaped its destiny. The American Bantam Car Company never produced another vehicle after its run of 2,675 Jeeps for the U.S. Army. Instead, as the world modernized and war gave way to uneasy peace, the Bantam factory turned to building Jeep cargo trailers, torpedo motors, and assorted military odds and ends. The era of frantic innovation faded into the routines of industrial production. But in ghostly warehouses, the legacy lingered. Bantam's brief starlight had changed the world, yet the Army's requirements, 75 vehicles a day, proved insurmountable for Butler's modest workforce. While Willys and Ford scaled up to supply the gargantuan quantities of Jeeps demanded by a global war, Bantam workers watched their miracle become a blueprint for others. When the last BRC left the line, the company quietly faded, focusing only on trailers until the doors closed for good in 1956. One local remembered, the shop floors still echoed with stories years after, even as machines were hauled away. It's like the walls ached with what they'd built. For decades, the original brick administrative building stood as a lone citadel, a makeshift monument to an era when desperation begat genius. Locals and Jeep enthusiasts came each year for the Bantam Jeep Festival, driving restored MBs and GPWs down the very roads where Ralph Turner had first driven into legend. In school classrooms, teachers spoke of innovation, but few realized that, just outside town, the roots of global freedom sprouted in a battered garage. Then, in November 2025, fire struck. The Bantam building, last remnant of the original Jeep factory, was ravaged by flames. Firefighters worked through the night, but decades of disuse and fragile rafters could not be saved. As news spread, an entire community mourned, not merely the loss of a structure, but a physical link to the moment America gambled on its own ingenuity. The Bantam building transcends mere bricks and mortar. It symbolizes the resolve, innovation, and collaboration that contributed to a significant chapter in American history, told Todd Wagner, president of Friends of the Bantam Jeep Association, in a subdued voice, the smoke still drifting over Butler. Now the site stands empty, the annual festival set to continue only in spirit. But in every mud-caked rim, every battered grill, and every story told at campfires and reunions, the miracle endures. The buildings are gone, the legacy lives on. Some say the world's greatest revolutions aren't won in grand halls or government chambers, but in the hushed dedication of small towns, by men and women who dare the impossible because no one else will. The story of the Jeep and of Butler stands as a testament to the power of innovation under impossible deadlines and of the humility, sacrifice, and quiet courage required to change the world. No better proof exists than the crumbling bricks of a once-forgotten Pennsylvania factory, and no greater heartbreak than knowing such greatness often flickers and vanishes before it's truly understood. American Bantam can genuinely be acknowledged as the father of the Jeep, as historian John Graff reflected. Bantam met the deadline with their prototype and secured the first contract for what would ultimately become the Jeep. The world may remember Willys and Ford, but every time a Jeep fords a river, conquers a mountain, or ferries hope and aid where nothing else can travel, Butler breathes again. As the last echoes faded from the brick walls of the Bantam factory, the world entered a new age. The war that made the Jeep a necessity had also rendered its birthright bittersweet. American Bantam, once a laboratory for impossible miracles, could not keep the pace of industrial giants and faded from the automotive stage. Yet the spirit of the shop floors, the explosion of creativity that delivered a working prototype in 49 days, lived on in legend and in practice. Bantam's design, refined but never truly replaced, became the foundation for more than 650,000 Jeeps built by Willys and Ford, the vehicles scattering across every front of World War II, and then across continents after the armistice. Even after the Army's final orders for Bantam ended, the company persisted, building Jeep cargo trailers and torpedo motors, finding ways to support Allied victory from the shadows. Employees who'd welded frames and riveted panels remembered stories of midnight shifts and creative hacks, small-town innovation fueling the gears of global history. By 1956, after a final run of military contracts, the last doors at Bantam closed. Its modest administrative building became the silent sentinel of an industry that changed the trajectory of the world. Memory and memorial, a town remembers. The post-war years saw the world racing forward, often blind to where revolutions had started. Still, Butler endured as the birthplace of the Jeep, honored in annual festivals, murals, and in the memories of those who understood what impossibility really looks like. A single battered structure, first garage, later office, stood as anchor for collective memory. In the shade of that building's bricks, the story of the Jeep was retold year after year. How factory manager Frank Fenn, designer Karl Probst, and ace drivers like Ralph Turner risked livelihood and reputation on a legend. Without their resolve, the Army's impossible request might have languished alongside so many unrealized dreams. Butler's connection to the Jeep never faded. Local schools, auto clubs, and townsfolk taught their children that history can turn not just on the decisions of presidents and generals, but on the sweat-soaked midnight labor of people like themselves. The heritage lost and carried forward. In November 2025, fire ravaged the last standing Bantam office building, erasing a tangible link to the day a handful of Americans outran the clock and impatience of a nation. As flames gutted fragile wood and ancient beams, the Butler community gathered, mourning not simply a building, but the soul of a story. Memories persist, kindled in stories, photos, and the battered silhouettes of lovingly restored Jeeps rumbling down Main Street during the June festivals. The Bantam building transcends mere bricks and mortar. It symbolizes the resolve, innovation, and collaboration that contributed to a significant chapter in American history. said Todd Wagner of the Friends of the Bantam Jeep Association, echoing the community's grief and pride. It hurts, but the truth remains. Buildings fall, legacies endure. A world changed forever. Today, the world's militaries, explorers, aid workers, and adventurers rely on machines whose bones and spirit come directly from Butler's miracle. Whenever ingenuity must trump bureaucracy, whenever a team is asked to do the impossible with nothing but scraps and will, the lesson of Bantam's Jeep is revived. Factories rise and burn, but the revolution of possibility, born in a steel-framed Pennsylvania night, never truly disappears. The Jeep's DNA travels in every tire track over sand and mud. In the stillness after the fire, Butler's streets pulse with invisible memory. Passers-by slow in front of the vacant lot where the last Bantam building once stood, eyes lingering on air thick with a century's ambition. News stories run tributes. Tattered blueprints and smoky photographs pass hands at the annual Jeep Festival, survivors of time and flame. It symbolizes the resolve, innovation, and collaboration that contributed to a significant chapter in American history. Todd Wagner reminds a crowd in June, voice nearly lost amid a convoy of restored Jeeps, their engines singing tribute far louder than words. The old workers, those who have not themselves become part of memory, smile quietly. They recount how, in 1940, a bankrupt car maker and a Detroit freelancer bested the odds, how sketches on greasy napkins and wrench turning at midnight beat the certainty of giants. Their resolve, not their payrolls or patents, became America's weapon. Karl Probst returned to Detroit in the anonymity of contract engineering. Ralph Turner kept telling the story in taverns and at parades, sometimes whispering, sometimes roaring, always proud that he'd put his hands on the machine that changed the world. Bantam's managers vanished into post-war business. Butler, though, kept the faith. The revolution complete when innovation becomes invisible. With every passing decade, the truth grows starker. So many of history's revolutions lose their origin, becoming fixtures, then assumptions, then ghosts. Nobody marvels at four-wheel drive or a slotted Jeep grill rumbling over a mountain pass. The world assumes such ideas were always there. But every time lives are saved in a war zone by a nimble utility truck, every time aid reaches an isolated village over impassable roads, the echo of Butler's miracle still resounds. The Jeep's silhouette has leapt from battlefield necessity to global icon, its DNA present in SUVs, ambulances, and even rescue robots of today. Every carrier in the world still carries his idea, and his refusal to accept needless death, one Army officer once said, gazing at a battered Willys MB in a museum. He never sought fame, only fewer funerals. The Bantam team did not leave bronze statues, but they gave the world a silent promise that innovation, even against impossible odds, can outlast both buildings and nations. And so the revolution is complete when it becomes invisible. Yet, if you drive a rugged track, admire ingenuity, or believe that small, determined teams can move history, remember the smoke and sweat of Butler's factory and the 49-day rush that shaped our world. Pause here, hit subscribe, and reflect. What untold revolutions, what next impossible deadlines, wait for their own defiant answer.